So we ended the last meeting looking at these special cases. Let's start with them. Why don't you pause your video and graph this equation, y equals -1. You remember, of course, that this means that y is always -1, and x can be any real number. Now, one of the things that people often get wrong when I'm marking their tests or exams, if I ask them to label 3 points on the line, the only one they give me is this one. But that's impossible. Every line contains an infinite number of points. Every ordered pair you see here could be written down. We could have 2, -1, 3, -1, 3.5, -1, 4, -1. Remember that when you see this, y equals a number, this will give you a horizontal line. All right, pause your video, graph this one. Again, we remember that this tells us that x equals 4, and y could be any number. Four, -1, 4, 2, 4, 5. When we connect the ordered pairs, we see that we have a vertical line. Every time we see that equation, x equals a number, we know we have a vertical line. So some important information. Not difficult, but people just seem to forget. If we're given some equation, x equals c, where c is any real number, you will always have the graph of a vertical line. So every time we see that equation, x equals c, the x coordinate will always be c, whatever that number is, that will give us x. And remember that y can be any real number, any real number. Horizontal lines. If we're given the equation y equals c, where c is any real number, then we will always have the graph of a horizontal line. The y coordinate in this case will be c, and x can be any real number. Any number. Let's move on to talking about slope. Let's draw a line here. When I draw a line that is going up and to the right, we say that this has a positive slope. When I draw a line that is going down and to the right, we say it has a negative slope. Now, if you're thinking about the vertical line and horizontal line we just drew, you'll be wondering because they don't have a positive or a negative slope, but we'll come back to that. The slope of a line is known as the change in y over, and give myself enough room there, the change in x. Sometimes that's written using this symbol to represent the change in y over the change in x. Now it's useful to have a formula, one that you should memorize. So if we're given 2 points, we're going to call one of them x1, y1. The other one is x2, y2. And please note that we're going to say that x1 cannot equal x2. Then we have a formula for slope. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The change in y over the change in x. So we're asked to find the slope of a line given a graph. Well, we have 2 ordered pairs here. And it doesn't matter if I choose this to be x1, y1, and this to be x2, y2, or if I choose to reverse it. It does not matter. What's important is that we label our points so we don't get confused. Now, if this is a formula that's new for you, every time you want to use it, you should write it down. That will help you memorize it. Now we can substitute in our values. People often mix up their variables when substituting, so do be careful. y2 is 6, minus y1 is 2, all over x2, negative 1, subtract x1. So we have 4 over negative 2, and we see the slope is negative 2. We can check that. First of all, when we look at our graph, we see that it is going down to the right. So it is indeed a negative slope. Now remember, we said that the slope is the change in y over the change in x. We could write negative 2 over 1. If I look at 2 points on the line here, I look at a right triangle created by those ordered pairs, I see that the change in y from 4 to 6 is 2. The change in x from negative 1 to 0 is 1. So this is indeed a negative slope of negative 2. The change in y is 2 over the change in x is 1. If we're given 2 points, we can find the slope using our formula. Now remember, I said it doesn't matter which is your x1, y1, which is your x2, y2. That doesn't make any difference. Can you pause the video and write the formula for slope from memory? Good. Now can you substitute in the values? Be careful when you're subtracting that negative 1. we see here, we have a slope of -1. So again, if we plot these ordered pairs and connect them, we should have a line going down to the right. We have an ordered pair at -1, 5, at 6, -2. It is indeed a negative slope. And remember what we said about creating that triangle. We see that the change in y is 1 and the change in x is 1, confirming our slope of -1. Pause your video, find the slope given these two ordered pairs. Now I may have put those in a different order than you did, just to show you that you will always get the same slope. Oops. Did you find it's -2/0? What does that mean when we have 0 at the bottom of a fraction? Yes, it tells us that the slope is undefined. Let's go back up to where we had the formula first written for the slope. Look what we said here. We said that x1 cannot equal x2, because if these are the same numbers and we're subtracting, we would have 0 in the denominator. That's exactly what happened in our example over here. x1 was the same as x2, and we have a slope that's undefined. Well, what kind of line would give us a slope that is undefined? Let's find out. -4, +3, -4, +5. It's a vertical line. A vertical line does have a change in y. It's changing up and down. But there's no change in x. It's not going left and right at all. It makes sense then that every vertical line has a slope that is undefined. Look at this one. What do you notice? Do you notice that y1 and y2 are the same? We didn't say that that wasn't permitted, but what will it mean for our slope? Zero over -7 equals 0. We have a slope of 0. What kind of line do we have? We have a horizontal line. Let's think about that. A horizontal line, if we look at it, there's a lot of change in y, but there's zero change in y, but there is a change in x. If the zero's on the top, it's going to be 0. So whenever we have a horizontal line, we have a slope that equals 0. The slope of a vertical line is always undefined because x1 equals x2. The slope of a horizontal line is always 0 because y1 equals y2. You need to memorize this. I just remember that the horizontal line is 0 because of the O. You can use whatever trick you need to memorize it. Now here's a little test for you. Graph the equation x equals 1. Do you remember what that means? Maybe you want to create a table of values. Pause your video, see if you can graph this line. See if you can list 3 ordered pairs for this line. You should remember that that equation tells us that x is always 1. And we remember that y can be any real number. That means y could be 0, -1, 3, anything. Did you remember that the equation x equals c is always a vertical line? Do you remember the slope of a vertical line? The slope of every vertical line is undefined. This is a very good test question and a good exam question. I could ask you to label 3 points on the line, to graph it, and tell me the slope. Pause your video, find 3 ordered pairs for this line, graph it, and tell me the slope. Again, you may have remembered that the equation tells us that y is always -2, and x can be any real number. So we have -5, -2, -1, -2, 4, -2. Did you remember that y equals c will give us a horizontal line? And do you remember the slope? The slope of every horizontal line is 0. We've talked about a lot of concepts in this lecture. I'd like you to go and take some time to practice these now. Remember, you can use your quizzes, the homework assignments in Pearson, or your e-text. There are also worksheets posted on the class Moodle page.